In the early hours of December 15th, a wave of explosions, power outages, and high-stakes diplomacy underscored how the war in Ukraine is intensifying on multiple fronts at once. From a massive nighttime drone attack shaking the Russian logistics hub of Rostov-on-Don, to repeated strikes crippling the Belgorod Luch power plant and leaving entire neighborhoods without electricity, the conflict is increasingly reaching deep into Russia's rear areas. At the same time, far from the battlefield, Ukrainian and U.S. delegations met for more than 5 hours in Berlin, where American envoy Steve Witkoff claimed a lot of progress had been made toward a revised 20-point peace plan. Together, these events paint a picture of a conflict marked by escalating military pressure, vulnerable infrastructure, and urgent, yet deeply contested, political negotiations. The nighttime drone attack on Rostov-on-Don in the early hours of December 15 marked another clear sign that the war surrounding Ukraine is no longer confined to frontline trenches or contested border regions. According to residents and local telegram channels, explosions began around 2:20 a.m. in the western part of the city and continued intermittently, following earlier air raid warnings issued across the Rostov region. Witnesses described the distinctive buzzing sound of drones in the sky before Russian air defenses reportedly destroyed dozens of aerial targets. In at least one case, debris from a downed drone fell into a residential area and ignited a fire, while video footage circulating online showed burning wreckage narrowly missing a high-rise apartment building. The force of the blasts reportedly rattled windows and triggered car alarms across nearby streets. As of now, there has been no confirmed information about casualties, and Russian authorities have yet to provide an official assessment of the full scale or consequences of the attack. Rostov-on-Don is not an accidental target. It is one of southern Russia's most important logistical and military administrative hubs, serving as a key node for rail, road, and command infrastructure supporting operations in the southern theater of the war. Military analysts have long noted that such cities play a critical role in moving troops, equipment, fuel, and ammunition, as well as coordinating air defense and command and control systems. From this perspective, drone attacks on Rostov are widely interpreted not as attempts to terrorize civilians, but as efforts to probe and strain Russia's rear-area security architecture. Even when air defenses intercept incoming drones, the psychological and logistical effects can be significant. Air raid sirens disrupt daily life, emergency services are stretched, and authorities are forced to divert resources to protect areas that were once considered relatively safe. If the explosions over Rostov-on-Don highlighted the vulnerability of Russia's logistical rear, the repeated strikes on the Belgorod-Luch combined heat and power plant reveal an even more sensitive pressure point: civilian energy infrastructure. In Belgorod, air raid sirens sounded before a strike hit the Luch plant, with residents in several districts soon reporting electricity outages. Videos showing a powerful explosion near the facility spread quickly across telegram channels, and the damage was later officially confirmed by Belgorod Region Governor Vyacheslav Gladkov, who stated that the attack had harmed critical engineering infrastructure. Although the exact weapon used remains unknown, the immediate effect was clear: entire neighborhoods were left without power, underscoring how fragile daily life becomes when key utilities are disrupted. What makes the Belgorod case particularly significant is not just this single incident, but the pattern of repeated attacks over the past several months. On December 10th, the Luch power plant was already struck, triggering multiple missile alerts and localized blackouts across the city. Before that, during the night of November 8th to 9th, falling debris and equipment damage caused a major outage, leaving more than 20,000 residents without electricity and heating. The damage to the gas turbine units was especially severe, as these turbines were responsible for supplying much of the city's power. At that time, Luch remained one of the last functioning power plants in Belgorod, following earlier damage to another facility. The situation deteriorated further after missile strikes on October 11th and again on October 13th, when preliminary reports indicated that turbines were destroyed and the plant was forced completely offline, plunging most city districts into darkness. These strikes illustrate how energy infrastructure has become a frontline target in modern warfare. Power plants are dual-use facilities. While they serve civilians, they also sustain military bases, communications, transportation networks, and local industry. Disabling them creates cascading effects that go far beyond temporary blackouts. For residents, particularly the elderly, loss of electricity and heating in colder months is not an abstract inconvenience, but a direct threat to health and safety. This reality raises uncomfortable ethical questions and fuels political narratives on both sides. Moscow frames such attacks as assaults on civilians, while Kiev and its supporters argue that these facilities underpin Russia's war effort and therefore constitute legitimate targets under the logic of strategic pressure. In my view, Belgorod's experience highlights a dangerous escalation dynamic. Each successful strike on infrastructure increases pressure on Russian authorities to harden defenses and respond more aggressively, while also deepening public anxiety in border regions. At the same time, repeated outages risk eroding public confidence in the state's ability to provide basic security and services. While explosions lit up the skies over Rostov-on-Don and power outages spread across Belgorod, a very different kind of battle was unfolding behind closed doors in Berlin. On December 15, Ukrainian and U.S. delegations met for more than 5 hours, a session described by U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff as having made a lot of progress. According to Witkoff, the talks involved Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, himself as the U.S. envoy, Jared Kushner, former President Donald Trump's son-in-law, and senior representatives from both sides. The discussions were substantive enough that all parties agreed to reconvene the following morning, a detail also confirmed earlier by Germany's Handelsblatt and by Ukrainian presidential communications advisor Dmytro Lytvyn. Notably, Handelsblatt reported that the U.S. side had expressed preliminary optimism about the chances of success. At the heart of these negotiations lies a revised U.S. peace plan that has been under development for nearly a month. Originally consisting of 28 points and widely criticized for appearing to favor Russia, the proposal has now been reduced to 20 points. Despite this streamlining, the most difficult issue remains unresolved: territory. Reports indicate that Washington has demanded concessions in the Donbass region, a position Ukraine continues to categorically reject. Alongside territorial questions, negotiators are said to be focusing on 3 core pillars: a framework document outlining the basic contours of a settlement, security guarantees intended to prevent renewed hostilities, and a separate document laying the groundwork for post-war reconstruction. According to sources cited by the Wall Street Journal, the White House is aiming to secure some form of peace agreement by the end of the year, a remarkably ambitious timeline given the scale of the conflict. Before dawn on December 15, southern Russia was shaken by a new wave of explosions, power outages, and urgent diplomatic signals coming out of Europe. A massive nighttime drone attack reportedly struck Rostov-on-Don, a key military and logistics hub, while Belgorod faced yet another hit on its already damaged Luch power plant, plunging neighborhoods into darkness. At the same time, far from the battlefield, high-stakes Ukraine-U.S. talks in Berlin stretched late into the night, with American officials claiming significant progress toward a revised peace plan. Together, these events reveal a conflict intensifying on the ground while political maneuvering accelerates behind closed doors, setting the stage for critical decisions that could shape the next phase of the war. In the early hours of December 15, Rostov-on-Don experienced one of its most intense nighttime security incidents in recent months, underscoring how the geography of the conflict continues to expand beyond the immediate front lines. According to local Telegram channels and eyewitness accounts shared on social media, explosions began around 2:20 a.m., first reported in the western districts of the city and then continuing intermittently for an extended period. Prior to the blasts, air raid warnings had already been issued across the Rostov region, signaling that authorities anticipated a possible drone threat well before residents heard the first detonations. Residents living on the outskirts of the city described the distinctive buzzing sound commonly associated with drones in flight, a detail that has become disturbingly familiar in many regions affected by the war. Shortly afterward, Russian air defense systems reportedly engaged multiple aerial targets. Local sources claimed that dozens of drones were destroyed, although official confirmation regarding exact numbers or the attacker's origin had not yet been released by Russian authorities at the time of reporting. This gap between eyewitness reporting and official statements is itself telling, reflecting the information fog that increasingly surrounds such incidents. One particularly alarming moment captured on video and circulated online showed a drone being struck midair, followed by flaming debris falling toward the city. Witnesses said the burning wreckage narrowly missed a residential high-rise building, instead landing nearby and igniting a fire. The blast was reportedly strong enough to make windows rattle in surrounding apartment blocks and trigger car alarms throughout nearby streets. While no casualties were reported, the psychological impact on civilians was unmistakable, another night of disrupted sleep, fear, and uncertainty for ordinary people far from what many still consider the front line. The strategic significance of Rostov-on-Don cannot be overstated. As a major military administrative center in southern Russia, the city plays a critical role in logistics, command coordination, and the movement of personnel and equipment supporting operations in the southern direction. Its extensive rail and road networks are vital arteries for supply chains. For this reason, analysts widely believe that any drone strikes or attempted strikes in the area are aimed not at civilians, but at military infrastructure, including air defense systems, fuel depots, ammunition storage facilities, and command and control elements. From a strategic perspective, such attacks are less about immediate physical destruction and more about signaling vulnerability. By reaching deep into rear areas like Rostov-on-Don, these operations aim to stretch air defense resources, complicate military planning, and exert sustained pressure on the broader security system. In my view, this reflects a clear evolution in the conflict. The rear is no longer perceived as safe or untouchable. Even when air defenses intercept most threats, the very act of forcing their activation achieves a psychological and strategic effect. Importantly, Russian authorities have so far refrained from releasing detailed, confirmed assessments of the damage or the full scale of the attack. This cautious communication strategy may be intended to prevent panic or speculation, but it also highlights a growing tension between official narratives and the real-time experiences of residents documenting events on their phones. As these incidents become more frequent, managing public perception may prove almost as challenging as managing the airspace itself. While Rostov-on-Don was grappling with drone interceptions in the early hours of December 15th, the city of Belgorod once again found itself facing the consequences of direct strikes on critical civilian infrastructure. This time, the target was the Luch combined heat and power plant, a facility that has increasingly become a symbol of the city's vulnerability and the broader energy dimension of the conflict. According to Russian media and local residents, air raid sirens sounded across Belgorod before an explosion was reported near the power plant, followed almost immediately by electricity outages in several districts. Videos showing a powerful blast in the vicinity of the Luch plant quickly spread across Telegram channels, reinforcing the seriousness of the incident. Unlike in Rostov-on-Don, where official confirmation remained limited, the Belgorod strike was publicly acknowledged by Governor Vyacheslav Gladkov, who stated that the attack caused damage to engineering infrastructure. However, he did not specify the type of weapon used, describing it only as being of unknown origin, a formulation that has become increasingly common in official statements surrounding such incidents. What makes the December 15th strike particularly significant is its place in a longer and troubling timeline. As reported earlier, the Luch power plant was also struck on December 10th, when missile alerts sounded repeatedly across the city and parts of Belgorod experienced power outages. Before that, during the night of November 8th to 9th, the same facility suffered severe damage when falling debris and equipment failures triggered a major blackout. More than 20,000 residents were left without electricity and heating, a harsh reminder of how quickly modern urban life can be disrupted when energy systems fail. The situation worsened further in October. On October 11th, Belgorod was hit by a missile strike that damaged the Luch plant and left most city districts without electricity. Just 2 days later, on October 13th, another attack reportedly destroyed turbine components, forcing the plant to go completely offline. By that point, the Luch facility had already been described as one of the last functioning power plants in the city, following earlier damage to another station. In other words, Belgorod's energy resilience had already been stretched to its limits well before the December attacks. The repeated targeting of the Luch combined heat and power plant illustrates how energy infrastructure has become a front line of its own. Power plants are not only sources of electricity and heat, they are pillars of civilian stability, especially in winter conditions. Disrupting them does not require mass casualties to have a strategic effect. Prolonged outages undermine public morale, strain local authorities, and force the diversion of resources away from military objectives toward emergency repairs and civilian support. This pattern suggests a deliberate strategy of attrition rather than a search for immediate tactical victories. Repeated strikes on the same facility signal persistence and intent, sending a message that even repaired infrastructure remains at risk. At the same time, it places regional leaders in a difficult position. They must reassure the public, restore services, and maintain confidence, all while facing the possibility of renewed attacks. As explosions echoed across southern Russia and power outages spread through Belgorod, a very different but no less consequential battle was unfolding behind closed doors in Berlin. On December 15th, Ukrainian and U.S. delegations held a marathon meeting lasting more than 5 hours, a clear signal that diplomatic urgency is rising alongside military tension. According to U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, the talks made a lot of progress and were scheduled to continue the following morning, reinforcing the sense that negotiators are racing against both time and events on the ground. The composition of the meeting itself drew attention. Present were Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, the son-in-law of former U.S. President Donald Trump, as well as senior representatives from both delegations. This mix of official diplomats and politically influential figures suggests that Washington is exploring multiple channels to shape a potential settlement, particularly as domestic political considerations in the United States loom larger ahead of the coming year. At the heart of the Berlin discussions was a revised U.S. peace plan, which has been under negotiation among the United States, Ukraine, and European partners for nearly a month. Originally consisting of 28 points, the proposal has now been streamlined to 20, a move that likely reflects attempts to narrow disagreements and focus on what negotiators consider achievable. German business newspaper Handelsblatt reported that the talks would continue on Monday, December 15th, and noted preliminary U.S. optimism about the prospects for success. Yet beneath this cautious optimism lies the most contentious issue of all, territorial disputes. According to multiple reports, Washington has pushed for concessions involving the Donbass region, a demand that Kyiv has firmly rejected. For Ukraine, territorial integrity is not merely a bargaining chip but a core principle tied to sovereignty, public trust, and the legitimacy of any future government. From my perspective, this remains the fault line that could either break the talks or force a fundamental rethinking of what peace actually means in this context. Beyond territory, sources indicate that negotiators are discussing 3 key initiatives: a framework document outlining the basic parameters of a settlement, security guarantees intended to prevent a renewed conflict, and a separate document laying the groundwork for post-war reconstruction. These elements suggest that the talks are no longer hypothetical, they are increasingly technical and forward-looking, assuming at least the possibility of a ceasefire or freeze in hostilities. According to sources cited by the Wall Street Journal, the White House is aiming to secure a peace agreement by the end of the year. This timeline is ambitious, perhaps even overly so, given the realities on the ground. The drone attacks on Rostov-on-Don and the repeated strikes on Belgorod's power infrastructure serve as stark reminders that military pressure is not easing, it is intensifying. In this sense, the battlefield and the negotiating table are deeply interconnected. Each explosion, each blackout, strengthens or weakens negotiating positions in subtle but powerful ways. The Berlin talks reflect a moment of strategic convergence. All sides appear to recognize that the cost of prolonging the conflict continues to rise, not only in lives and resources, but in long-term stability. However, recognizing that reality does not automatically translate into agreement. Peace plans can be drafted and revised, but they must ultimately align with political realities, public expectations, and security concerns that cannot be easily compromised.